In Peggy Ann's sessions, she mentioned about the power of the community. How many people here have even thought about having a community involved with their app? Just a handful of people. How many people even know how to start a community from scratch? 2 or 3 people? Well, Natalie, do you want to tell us about how you create and engage with a community?
Indeed. Oh, horrible font substitution.
Okay.
It's not the font I chose. I'd just like to clarify that for any graphic designers in the room. Never mind, we'll go with it. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, thank you. And it's really interesting to hear from the speakers just now. So we're going to be talking about building something out of nothing, or the slightly longer but less catchy title that wouldn't quite fit on the slide properly: How to Build a Passionate Community from Scratch Using Social Media, Events and Great Content. So a lot of this is to do with, as we said, kind of building communities. Some of it will be slightly more relevant if you're doing stuff on PC, or easier to implement if you're doing it on PC than with apps. And with some app-related mobile content, it's slightly less relevant depending on the nature of your app. You're not necessarily going to have an app that creates a community or that there's a benefit from, but hopefully there'll be something here that you can gain from it. So just quickly give you some context as to who I am. My name's Natalie Griffith. I own Press-Based PR, which is a 1.5, 2-year-old PR agency designed to specifically work with indies and kind of startups and help try and get new brands off the ground. I've been in the games industry nearly 25 years. I started life as a graphic designer, which is why I care that there's a font substitution on this. So I started off doing subscription Nintendo magazines. I designed games packaging at Codemasters for about 18 months, 2 years. And I was then the editor of the official Nintendo magazine for Australia for 5 years after that. And it was after that journalism spell that I made the move into PR, and I established the PR and marketing team at Blitz Game Studios in 2000. And I was there about 12 years. And now, as I say, I have my own agency. For the last just over a year, I've been working with a really exciting indie startup called Payload Studios, who have been working on a game called Terratech. And what's been interesting about that is that their plan right from the beginning was to do something that was very community-led, that was partly to support their funding goals. So 6-7 months in, we knew we were going to do a Kickstarter, and we knew that we couldn't just go to Kickstarter out of the gates with an unknown thing and hope for success. But they also knew that the nature of the game that they were building, it was something that was going to thrive and be improved by community being involved in community feedback. So it's been a very sort of collaborative development process all along, to the extent that they actually took me on board and a community manager before they hired a second programmer. That's the importance that they placed on this. So I'll be making a few references to that as we go on. So luckily, as I say, the kind of Payload team got the importance of that and knew that they needed to get some help and start really early with it. But a lot of people think that PR is a bit pointless, so it's too much effort, and who needs a community? That seems like a lot of work, having to deal with lots of people all the time and listen to them all the time. And in my experience, it seems to be either the blindly optimistic or the blindly pessimistic people that seem to think that. So some of the stuff that I often hear on the kind of blindly optimistic side, on the PC side of things, it's like, oh, well, it's fine, I'll get on Steam and it'll all be marvellous. If that was ever true, and I think maybe for a slack handful of people perhaps it was, it's certainly not now. Steam is very close to becoming like the App Store in terms of discoverability and user acquisition problems. So again, you can't just come straight out of the gates, appear on the Steam Store and expect to have loads of sales and loads of success, particularly now with the recent changes of how, with the curated content and how they're changing how they display new releases, that's got even harder. And as I say, Kickstarter. I've had £1 for every person that said to me that a Kickstarter campaign was a nice bit of easy marketing. That would be great. I'd be very, very rich. I'd be able to retire to the Maldives. I think a lot of people assume that A, they underestimate the amount of work involved in a Kickstarter campaign, and B, they assume that actually it's sort of the process of being on Kickstarter is kind of a marketing thing in itself. It really isn't. There's an awful lot of work. We'll come back to that in a minute. But yeah, don't underestimate Kickstarter. The amount of effort to go Kickstarter. And yeah, it's all about YouTube these days. Look, it is quite a lot, but you can't just stumble across PewDiePie's email address, send him your game, and suddenly start making in the millions. It takes time to build these things up, and the big YouTubers aren't going to be interested in you straight away. And then on the sort of blindly pessimistic side, you get the kind of cynical ones who kind of go, oh, I can't be bothered with all that PR nonsense because it's all about who you know anyway. It doesn't matter about the games anymore. Or they kind of see one or two people's success. They don't see the 6-7 years of hard work that went before that, and they assume they were overnight. And they just got lucky. Yeah, not so much. It's bloody hard work. So why do you bother? Okay, so as I said, Steam now is getting increasingly like the App Store. So you need to be on either platform. You need to be building up awareness of your game and what you're doing way in advance. Kickstarter, as I said, you need to be, if you're not assuming that you're going to be 24/7 on planning your campaign for a month in advance and then 24/7 while you're running the campaign doing nothing else but Kickstarter stuff, then you're underestimating the amount of work it involves. And YouTubers, as I say, you've got to start small. The success does beget success with YouTubers. It can often be very, very difficult to get the attention of YouTubers. It can be difficult to even find their contact details. But by starting small and by bringing a community along with you and mobilising them to lobby for you, you start to get more and more interested, and the bigger ones will pay attention, and the bigger ones will pay attention, and it all starts to build up. The point about it being who you know, I'm going to kind of half agree with, actually, because PR has always been about relationship building. That's not to say that there's this, the kind of secret indie cabal and secret corrupt journalists, secret handshakes, and we all get coverage because we know each other. No, we get coverage because we make an effort to understand what particular journalists care about and understand what those journalists' readers care about. And so that relationship building is super important, and yes, who you know matters, but that's not because you know them, it's because you've made an effort to understand what they want, and it's an important distinction to make, I think. And in terms of luck, I've always been a bit of a believer that you kind of make your own luck. Sometimes people do have kind of lucky things happen to them, and you happen to be in the right place at the right time. But I think the important thing is that people that are seen to be lucky aren't just blindly lucky in a vacuum. They've kind of made themselves open to that serendipity, and then they've seen the potential in it when it's happened. So if something lucky, a lucky break happens to you, if you don't spot the potential in that and you don't follow it through and you don't make the most of that, then that's a wasted opportunity. So don't just dismiss other people for being lucky because they need to make the effort to make the most of it. So assuming that we're now all in agreement that it is worth bothering with, how do you actually go about seeing the wood for the trees? There's an enormous amount of stuff to do, and the PR often looks like a really black box that is kind of difficult to get your head around. I think a lot of indies fail to realise that actually they already have a lot of the skills they need to be good at PR. They're just not used to applying them in that way. So I think that ability to think creatively, that ability to try lots of different things and experiment and see what works and see what doesn't, keep building on that, keep iterating on it. They're all things that make someone a really good PR, and they're things that make you a good developer as well. So just shifting your mindset ever so slightly to think that, okay, well, I do actually already have some of this skill set, even if I don't have the contacts or I don't quite know where to start. It's not a completely lost cause. But with everything, it's all about the planning. So right at the very beginning, if you're looking to build up a community or even just build your brand presence, you need to get a good plan in place. You can't just sort of throw mud at the wall and send a press release out every 3 months and hope for the best. Deciding what you want to achieve and how long you've got to achieve it is probably the important bit at the beginning of that plan. So what is your definition of success for this kind of next stage in the journey of your studio or in your journey of your game? Are you just experimenting on a new store and like getting data from that is enough of a success for you? Are you looking to earn a certain benchmark of money because you have to pay out to investors, or you have to pay a loan off, or you're looking to a certain amount of income threshold for other reasons? Everybody's success is different, so you need to define that up front, work out what you're trying to achieve, and then work out how long you've actually got to achieve it. So at the beginning, then, we're working out what's possible. Once you know what you're trying to achieve, you need to then have a hard look at your skills, your experience, your contacts, the other people that you're working with, their extended networks. What is it possible practically for you to do? And what do you need to get some extra help in for? Make sure you do find people that can, and this isn't just a pitch for my services, because there's lots of people that can help you, but make sure that you're really honest with yourself about not just what you're capable of doing, but what you have the time to do. Don't spread yourself too thin either. And make sure that you spread all of this stuff out amongst your team. If there's a small group of you working together, you all need to take different responsibilities for things. You can't put all this on one person's shoulders, particularly when you get to community management, when it's a little bit bigger and you've got a lot of things to manage sort of round the clock. So once you've decided that and you've got the people in place, you need to start thinking about positioning, which is a kind of, cheesy marketing expression, but it's what you need to do. You need to work out where you fit in the marketplace. Hopefully you've done this for your game idea anyway, but you need to look at what your competition is, where you stand out, what's different, what do you want to be known for, what do you want to be remembered for or respected for. Once you've got that kind of stuff clear in your head, you can then start articulating it and communicating it to people. Then you need to get your basic presence kind of sorted out, your online presence. Website is kind of an obvious place to start, but don't throw the moon and a stick at it. It doesn't have to be hugely complicated. It needs to be clear and clean, and it needs to get your key stuff across. Don't over-design it. Don't saddle yourself with a structure that's going to be really difficult to extend later. Try and future-proof yourself a bit if you can. If you think later you're going to want to integrate forums into it, or you're going to want to be able to take payments for whatever reason, think about these things now and try and make sure that you're not going to have to reinvent the wheel 6 months down the line when you're even busier because you can't now integrate the thing that you want to integrate. I think as a minimum, if anybody's not familiar with Vlambeer's dopresskit.com, you should go there immediately. So Vlambeer, Dutch indie developer, they've created a brilliant resource that's basically a template for creating press kits. It gives you every kind of prompt of every key bit of information you need to share. The structure of it encourages you to be succinct and be really clear with it. And actually, if you struggled with the positioning bit in the previous step, then actually going through that process is a really, really good way to get clear in your own head whether you've actually, you're sharing too much information or not enough information or not the right kind of things. And also, it's such a common format now that a lot of the media are really used to receiving links to those, and they know exactly where to spin to get the assets and get the bits and pieces that they want. So have a look at that. In terms of social media, I would say definitely set up a Twitter account, even if you don't think you're going to have an enormous amount of players engaging with you on Twitter. It's a really, really brilliant way, particularly if you're not able to get out and about to all events all the time. It's a great way of actually connecting with journalists and other influencers and just kind of getting your word out there in different ways. Likewise, Facebook, Facebook is one of those kind of things that I think it's a little bit like where we were with, say, websites 10, 15 years ago. It's like, oh, we've got to have one because it's there. I don't think you necessarily have to have a Facebook page. If your game isn't something that suits that kind of community engagement and people checking in regularly for updates of what you're going to be doing next, then there's no point. You're just creating work for yourself and an extra channel that you have to maintain and put content on. So if you don't think that you've either got the bandwidth or you've got the need to have a Facebook page, and this applies to any of the channels actually, or that your people aren't going to be hanging out there, then don't put the effort into it. Don't kind of think, well, I've got to have this tick list of all of these different channels I've got to have running. Don't spread yourself too thin. It's not always necessary. YouTube as well. We've talked about YouTube in terms of reaching out to third-party YouTubers to cover your games. But you should think about having that presence yourself as well. Video content is by far the most absorbed these days and most engaged with. So make sure you're setting up something there so that you can share your journey as you go through development. And you can actually kind of share different stuff on there. You can share tips about the game, all kinds of bits and pieces. But then think about some of the other channels that are really, really growing now. So if there's something like Twitch, for instance, we've managed to get incredible benefit out of using Twitch for TerraTech. So for the last 4 or 5 months, the TerraTech team have streamed daily on weekdays at 5 o'clock. And they've done a whole load of stuff from in-development stuff, coding tips, building tips for the game, graphic designers doing things, people showing how they're doing the UI, people just showing off the game, showcasing what people have created in the game, community content, all of that kind of thing. And it's been a massive, massive source of building our community for us. And the other important thing is when you use some of these channels, especially ones that are really on the ascendance, like Twitch, who are really keen to engage with developers big and small, is that it's always worth talking to them directly. And Twitch themselves are brilliant, and the guys in the UK office are really, really good, and they're really communicative. And And we engaged with them really, really early on and wanted to, we could see that coming up towards our Kickstarter, it would be super useful for us to try and get a featured slot on the front page. But we assumed that we'd have to have gajillions of regular followers and subscribers in order to get a shot at that. Not the case. They're not worried about the kind of the vanity of the numbers. It's about the quality of that engagement. So we had loads of really in-depth talks with them about the type of thing they wanted to see, the type of content that they were trying to encourage developers to show and broadcast on Twitch. And by appealing to that, which was also appealing to our users, we got their attention. And even though we had relatively modest numbers, we managed to get a feature slot for the opening weekend of our Kickstarter. And then we tried it on a bit cheekily and got another one for the closing weekend of our Kickstarter. But again, we've constantly evolved that, and we've constantly changed, and we've constantly gone back to them and said, okay, so we're doing this now, what do you think? And we're going to try this, how does that fit with your plans? And they've been really, really receptive to that. And we've now managed to snag a rolling feature slot so that every time we go live, we get a UK-based feature slot as well. And we're still a small startup studio that's still got a long way to go. And to think that that kind of exposure on such a massively growing platform is possible is really surprising, but it shows you what is possible if you engage with the right people. The other important thing with all the different channels and all the kind of presence you're going to have is making sure that you're linking them up. Share stuff across channels. Make sure that if, regardless of which channel people come at you from, they can find the others, because someone may come across you via Facebook but prefer to follow you on Twitter. Make it easy for them to find you and make those links across. And make sure that the content you're sharing across those different channels, but you're doing it in a way that suits those channels. Please don't hook up your Twitter feed to automatically post all your tweets to Facebook. Totally pointless. Just taking an extra few seconds to reframe that 140 characters into 200-300 characters and putting it with a different image on Facebook that suits it better on that channel is really, really worth the effort. Otherwise, you might as well not have the channel if you're not going to use it properly. So once you've got everything started, you then need to actually start pushing some stuff out, and you need to start sharing your passion about what it is that you're working on, what you care about, and all the kind of stuff that you want to talk to your community about. Be authentic and transparent all the time. Be really genuine. People see through it if you're just kind of posting random tweets out all the time, or if you've pre-scheduled stuff all the time, that becomes really obvious. Pre-scheduling can be really useful if you want to get things out, like to duplicate a message for a different time zone later in the night and you're not going to be awake. Sometimes that can be really useful, but don't over-rely on pre-scheduling things, because people will soon realise that you never reply to stuff because you're not online at the point the tweet goes live. So take a sort of careful balance with that. And also be very careful about getting third parties to do, even people like myself to run your social feeds, because unless somebody is completely embedded with the team and completely living and breathing the experience of the development in the same way that you are, you're not going to get that authenticity and you're not going to get such depth, and it's just going to look like a PR is running it for you. The one thing I advise people, particularly on Twitter, is to make sure that they're sharing stuff that they're passionate about that isn't just their own stuff as well. Be passionate about other people's stuff. I always say to have a kind of a rough third split on Twitter. So a third of what you do is broadcasting your own things. It's talking about what you're doing and making announcements. A third of it should be conversations. So that might be conversations that have been generated from stuff you've shared, or it may just be commenting on current trends or commenting on an article, or getting into a conversation with somebody that wanted tips on how to use whatever engine you're using, which would obviously be Marmalade. So I should say on brand, shouldn't I? But then also you want to be, the final third of it then wants to be actually kind of sharing other people's stuff. So actively supporting other people, retweeting other indie developers that you might have met at events and their game's out and you want to support them. Sending congratulations to people when they win awards, that kind of thing. If you're seen to be a studio or even a lone developer that is supportive of other people, that's a brilliant way of bringing other people along for the journey. The indie scene is so collaborative and so supportive generally that that's a fairly easy thing for people to do naturally, because it's not a sort of cynical, I'll support you and then next week you'll retweet me. It kind of happens organically because that's how people are, it seems to me, particularly in the UK indie scene. People are very, very positive, but you really, really see the benefits that if you make the efforts early on to support and share other people's stuff, then that will come back and it will help you later. The other important thing is that while you are being gloriously passionate on all the various channels you've chosen to talk on, You need to make sure that as people do start to follow and your community starts to build, that you are communicating with them. And most importantly, listening to them. You don't ever want to just become like a broadcast machine. You want to be listening to what they're saying. You want to be answering their questions, giving them feedback, asking their opinion on things. Actively seek their opinion. There's no point having a community if you're not going to work with them to improve what it is that you're providing for them down the line. But it's not just chat and conversation and retweets and stuff. You actually need to start thinking about producing some actual content. So you need to make it vary. What you're essentially doing is creating a content marketing plan, which again sounds like some horrible ivory tower marketing company thing. But that is what you're doing. When you're sharing screenshots or you're sharing a GIF of an amusing bug that happened yesterday, or you're doing a blog post, talking about a new feature that you're about to implement. This is all content that can be used to market your game and what you're working on. So make sure it's really varied. Have a mix of visual and written stuff because different people are interested in different types of things on different channels. Make it informative. And also, when you're strapped for time and strapped for cash as an indie, you want to aim for maximum reuse and repurposing of everything you create. And one thing I always advise a lot of indies to do is I kind of challenge them that every single piece of content they create, they come up with at least 3 uses for it. So if you're creating a screenshot that's going to go in a pitch document to an investor, can that become your new Twitter biog profile picture? Could it be something that you share on Screenshot Saturday, hashtag on a Saturday morning? Could you push it out through Indie Dev Hour on a Wednesday evening? Could you make that into something else that will illustrate a blog post that you've got planned for next week? Don't ever spend time creating an asset that only gets used once. It's a waste of everybody's time. Make sure you reuse it. The other thing to be aware of when you're creating all this content is not just to blindly create content and throw it out there. In order to build your community and again bring them along with you on that journey, you need to make sure that all of this stuff is fitting into a kind of broader narrative arc, if you like. So there'll be the individual things that you want to be talking about each week. There might be topics that you're focusing on over the next 2 or 3 weeks because that's the stuff that you're developing at the moment. But you need to try and have a broad vision of what the overall arc is going to be over kind of 6 months or 12 months or what you're working towards. So again, with TerraTech, we knew at the beginning of this year that we were going to Kickstarter in the summer, and we knew roughly the sweep of the main features that were going to go into the game and roughly when we'd be able to start talking about them and showing them. And from that, we could then create more detailed plans of the kind of things we wanted to talk about as time went on, so that everything we shared was in context with everything we'd already shared and everything we were about to share. That's not to say that you cast everything in stone on day one, because clearly you don't. You have to be reactive and things change in development, and you have to be aware of opportunities in the environment anyway. But having that plan to start with at least gets everybody focused on what you're trying to achieve. And also importantly, it means that you've got the ability to try and bank some materials earlier on when you're, believe it or not, less busy than you're going to be later. So always having some stuff backed up is going to mean that you don't suddenly get a bit snowed under and don't have time to do something this week, and then your community output dies for 2 weeks because you haven't had time to create stuff. So the other really important thing with this content plan, I touched on it briefly there, but make sure that it's tied to your development plan. I've had so many horror stories, and we had it lots when I was at Blitz, when we were beholden to kind of third-party publishers, that you'd get this plaintive phone call going, oh yeah, so we need 40 screenshots and we need them tomorrow. And then I have to go and tell the development team, and the development team bite my head off. And like you end up chucking a whole load of screenshots together, and they're not great. You're in control of that, though, as an indie developer. You shouldn't be, at the whim of external people suddenly dropping that kind of thing on you. You can completely control that. So make sure that this content that you're planning to produce fits into your development plan and not the other way round. So if you know what kind of stuff you're working on at a certain point, base your plan on that, rather than creating this PR and community plan in an ivory tower and then dropping it on the desk of whoever's going to do the screenshots or write the blog posts. Also make sure you have a look at ways of showing your progress as you go along. So again, if you've tied it closely to your development plan, it'll be much easier for you to show that tangible progress, because you know that you'll be creating assets that relate exactly to what you've been working on in the last few weeks. And also look at ways of showing that progress in action directly. So we talked about Twitch, streaming stuff like daily updates. When you start to get a community following what's happening and interested in what's going on, they will tune in day after day after day, because they will realise that on Monday you were like, oh, I want to see where they went with that and how they finished such and such. So it's really, really useful to be able to do that and engage with people and make sure that you keep the momentum going.
How about 3 or 4 minutes?
Okay. Yeah, no, I'm nearly there. Also, I think historically a lot of developers have been a bit scared about showing their game too early. I've had lots come to me in the past and kind of go, oh, I need some help with my game, but I can't tell you what it is because it's not finished yet and it's all a bit secret. Or I don't want to show somebody because somebody's going to rip me off. I think, again, the indie scene, I've never seen that happen. Everybody's too interested in their own thing and actually too invested in seeing everybody else be successful. And the benefits you can get from showing your game publicly or taking it to events and showing press early are really, really hugely important. So get your game out at events, even if you don't have booth space, and there's an awful lot of indie shows now and game events where it's cheap or it's either very cheap or free to get exhibition space. Get your game down there, get it in the hands of players, and then empower them to talk about it. Don't kind of go, oh, I'll show you this level, but you mustn't tell anybody. What's the point of being there if you're going to do that? So make sure you empower them to have demo builds available. Make sure that you're quite happy for them to video it, to share that video, to monetize that video if they're on YouTube as well, and get them to contribute ideas. There's a really powerful sense of commitment to a project when people are allowed to sort of peek behind the curtain early. People are still surprised that they're allowed to do that. That surprise will fade over time, but you can use that at the moment because people don't always get to see games really early and they get a real kick out of it. And as I say, with the press, don't be afraid to show them too early. Most press are used to seeing games early on. They know that stuff can look a bit rough and ready initially. They know that will improve. That's fine. Also, the reputable journalists know that if you say off the record and you're showing them just to get them interested, it's going to stay off the record. So don't get too paranoid about that kind of thing. But if you engage them early and send them occasional updates, not necessarily asking for coverage, but just kind of going, oh, you like this when you saw it at such and such a show. You might see what we've done now. Then again, your relationship building, and then when you need to go back to them for reviews or proper coverage, they already know who you are. And the important thing is to be aware that all of this takes practice. You're not going to be a pro at this from day one, but that's okay. Everybody is learning all the time, and things change really quickly as well. You will make mistakes, it's fine. But you need to make sure that you practice all this stuff because it won't be something that necessarily comes naturally to you first off. So practice that planning, that scheduling, the tweeting, the twitching, the engaging with people, the replying to comments, the how to deal with comments that are perhaps being a little bit bolshy. All of these things you will learn, and you will learn to work with your community and ultimately mobilise your community to work on your behalf, and that's where the real power of this comes. But it's why you must start as early as possible, because early mistakes are way less costly than later ones. And hopefully, this is the cheesy end, the proof of the pudding will then hopefully be in the results that you see, and hopefully you will then hit the goals that you set right at the beginning. Whatever that success looks like to you, hopefully you will then have a real strong community behind you that will have helped you hit those goals and help you move on to the next step as well. So that doesn't matter whether you're mobilising them to support you on Kickstarter or to buy the final game or whatever it is that you're wanting them to do. Once you've got that really passionate bunch behind you and they're the ones that start advocating for you on your behalf without you even having to ask them to, that's when you know you've built a community that's worth its weight in gold. So, do we have time for questions? Have I gone too much?
Two questions.
Okay.
Question about tiny studio, one-man band, etc. Indie with very little bandwidth, and maybe for the first game. Would you advise that all your sort of branding and presence and stuff is under the brand of the game, and how much is about the developer of the studio?
Or the studio, yeah.
And how do you avoid having to do another 6 channels the next time?
Yeah, that is always a difficult one, particularly in terms of what you name Twitter channels and stuff like that. I think generally when you're fairly small and you're going to be working on one game at a time, or your work. So like it's something like TerraTech, it's a fairly small studio, and it's a game that's going to be an ongoing. It's going to be one of those kind of things. We're not going to finish it and ship it. It's going to be an ongoing thing, and so everything's been tied around TerraTech. If you know that you're approaching it, and this is more common in kind of the mobile app scene, if you know that you're approaching it in a sort of more of a portfolio way, that you're going to have a new game out every 3 to 6 months, then it's worth looking at establishing the brand of the studio at the beginning and making sure that all of these kind of potential early adopters and evangelists for you, which are going to be kind of, you know, media and other indies and that kind of thing in the first instance rather than consumers, making sure they're aware of who you are as a developer and what you stand for, and then spinning the brand stuff off from that. But it is always, there isn't a kind of binary answer to that, really. It can be a struggle once you have 2 or 3 games out, but I have seen people get caught into a trap where they've thrown everything into one game's Twitter feed and one game's Facebook page and one game, and then they've gone and done something completely different, and they've sort of had to start from scratch. If your portfolio is going to be, say, all point-and-click adventures or whatever, then it's going to be much easier to transition people across to new brands' channels. But if you do a point-and-click, then a match 3, then you know, and you have a whole load of different stuff, then that cross-pollination of your existing community is going to be almost non-existent. So it's a bit of a kind of, it depends what you're trying to achieve. Don't know if that was any help.
Time for one more?
Anyone else?
No.
Everybody's just reading out this time.
Thank you very much.